Before we start detailing our blocking, I'd like to introduce a new tool that will help us accelerating the process. It's the Breakdowner tool. To show it to you, I've created a simple action with the bouncing ball rig, with the main controller only animated on the Z location axis. The Breakdowner tool is accessible in the tool panel on the left, whenever you are in pose mode. You can also access the Breakdowner option going into the header, pose, in-betweens, and the different Breakdowner option will be available here. If I now go on frame 2 where the ball starts to raise in the air, and I will select the Breakdowner 2 on the left, if I now left click and drag in the 3D viewport, you will see the ball going up and down, whether going toward the pose on frame number 5 or the pose on frame 0. And as I'm doing it, you can see that we have a percentage of breakdown shown in the top left corner. Currently 40%. This percentage corresponds to whether we are favorizing frame 0 or frame 5. If I create a breakdown this way with a value of 0, it will be exactly the same pose as pose 0, with a value of 100%, exactly the same pose as frame 5. If I use a value of 50% for the breakdown, the pose that will be created using the Breakdowner will be exactly in the middle between the pose on frame 5 and the pose on frame 0. As most Blender tools, we can isolate the channel we want whenever we are using the Breakdowner. Here I've input a rotation pose on frame 5, so the ball is interpolating both its location and its rotation from frame 0 to frame 5. If I now go to the Breakdowner menu, choose the Breakdowner, or you can use the shortcut Shift-E to activate it. If I then press R, it will only work with the rotation of the ball. If I press Shift-E and then G, it will only work with the location of the ball. And you can absolutely combine those with the X, Y, and Z key. If I go on frame 2, press Shift-E to activate the Breakdowner, then G, then X, the ball will only slide along the x-axis. It behaves exactly the same way as any transform tool. Two other tools are available to us. The Relax tool that we can access with Alt-E, and the Push tool that we can access with Ctrl-E. If my playhead is on a frame with a key, and then I press Alt-E to relax the current pose, the resulting pose will be closer to pose 0 as I get to 100%. If instead I press Ctrl-E, it will push the current pose. So basically, it will check the interpolation between frame 0 and 5, the ball is raising, and it will push it higher. The Relax Pose tool that you can call using Alt-E will create an intermediate key pose or breakdown, averaging the pose between the previous keyframe and the next keyframe. So using Alt-E and push it over 100% is exactly the same that using Shift-E, the classic breakdowner, and set it to 50%. So this tool is very useful when you start detailing your blocking. For example, here I have two poses that are pretty extreme, meaning that there is a big contrast between those two poses. With the torso root controller selected, I can press Shift-E and Blender will start interpolating between those two keys. From there I can choose to lower this controller to create a better arc instead of having a straight line. And then I can choose to use the breakdowner on the chest controller and whether keep a low percentage so that I'm favorizing the previous pose, or I can go beyond 50% if I want to rotate more the chest as if it was leading the animation. So it's a very cool tool to quickly block your breakdowns, but I do advise you to use it very cautiously and as less as possible. I generally use it only for the root of my character and sometimes to position the feet. It's a fantastic tool to keep track of your arcs, but certainly not a good tool to pose your character. To summarize, we have seen that the breakdowners allow us to create a key between two poses by choosing the level of interpolation we want between those two keys. As any transform channels, we can enter the value we want the interpolation to be processed with, We can isolate the location, rotation, or scale of the transform channels, and we can choose the axis we want to use the tool on. There is also a push tool and a relax tool, but I don't think they are very useful, since we can achieve the same result with the relax tool using the breakdowner, and I don't advise you to push your poses using a tool like that. I would do this by hand to get a more accurate result. The breakdowner is a super cool tool to keep track of your arcs and get a base for your pose and breakdowns, but I would never use it to create the final pose of one of my characters.